and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And in the news this week, the Equality Act, the federal LGBTQI rights bill, is reintroduced in the Congress, where the House looks good and the Senate not.
Yeah, very not, but who knows? Who knows? Stranger things have happened, like Trump moving to impose his ban on transgender troops in the military next month. It's complicated, but we'll give you the details.
Speaking of transgender troops, Chelsea Manning was locked up for refusing to testify in the WikiLeaks case.
But out in the States, we have a couple of wins for transgender people in the Iowa Supreme Court and the Ohio Court of Appeals.
But in Indiana, and this is kind of surprising, they have joined 6 states and the District of Columbia in providing a non-binary marker for driver's licenses.
Well, once they got Pence out of there, they could do things. More on Pence as we go along. A Catholic elementary school in the state of Kansas says no to kids with LGBT parents.
Just like Jesus would do.
Yeah.
But here's a surprise. You've heard of Liberty University, Jerry Falwell School, now run by his son. The students protested the transphobia of the Falwells.
Wonders will never cease. There have been arrests in the assassination of Brazilian lesbian political leader Marielle Franco.
China says that it accepts a UN resolution urging them to protect LGBT rights.
Activists say they haven't. And a big Stonewall 50 exhibit is opening in Washington, D.C. We'll show you a little of that.
Yeah. All right, so the Equality Act has been introduced today. 230 House members are sponsors, 46 senators.
The thing I love about the Equality Act is that it isn't just an LGBTQIATSNB plus bill.
Okay.
I was determined to get the whole list in there.
Can we put that at the bottom of the screen? I don't know if it would fit.
We put it as the subtitle of the Queer Liberation March coming up June 30th. More on that later. But it's not just us. It's a whole raft of people, because what it does is take several pieces of civil rights legislation and fix them. Fix them where they have left out women, fix them where they've left out race. And so it was a coalition of communities that put together the Equality Act, and it really affects a broad swath of people in a broad range of civil rights bills.
For many, many years, we had Congress members pushing back on that idea, because they said if you open up any of these old bills, then the right wing's going to come in and ruin them. And of course, the main basis of the Equality Act is the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Yeah.
Right.
But this is not about opening it up to give the right wing opportunities to do that. It's about adding things that need to be added to make sure that a wide, broad, many, many, many communities are covered, including us.
Because still about half the country is not covered by
more
these
than
laws?
half the states.
Well, states, but many municipalities within the states are covered.
Yes, but more than half the states do not have protections against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. And so people can be fired from jobs, lose their housing, not be served in restaurants or other public accommodations, simply because the proprietor of those establishments doesn't like the fact that you're LGBTQ.
Right.
They don't have to offer any other explanation. They don't have to justify it. They're perfectly free to say, you're not welcome here.
And I've never understood why this is, well, I guess I do understand why it's so hard given the way the Republican Party is these days. But this is a bill that, its predecessor, which was just a ENDA, right?
Employment only.
Lost by one vote in 1996.
Because the senator from Arkansas, the Democrat,
Pryor?
was it him or the other one?
Maybe.
Anyway, he was home in his state supposedly taking care of a sick relative or something. But that was in the Clinton administration, and I will never be convinced otherwise. Bill Clinton had that guy down there in Arkansas so that they wouldn't pass ENDA, so he wouldn't be held responsible for the passage of ENDA.
And wasn't the only reason they were having the vote was because they were really screwing us over on DOMA at the time?
Probably, yes.
Right. So they said, okay, we'll have a vote on that. But anyway, the House did pass ENDA at one point. I mean, so there have been votes in the past where we've won, but we're still in a situation where the House will pass this bill.
Yes.
And the Senate will not.
Well, it won't at the moment. I am not entirely convinced that we can't get there.
All right.
More importantly, can we get enough votes to override a Trump veto, which is more what we would expect. Although even he, may feel that given all the ways he's screwing us these days, that he has to pretend like he likes us and sign this bill.
Well, wouldn't this cover trans troops?
I think the law already covers trans
Yes,
troops,
of course.
but that's another conversation.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about this. There are now 155 members in Congress who are members of the LGBT Equality Caucus. They're all Democrats. There are 160 companies that came out in support of this.
Big corporations.
And then there's the polling on this from the Public Religion Research Institute that shows majority support in all 50 states. The highest is in New Hampshire, 81%. The lowest in Arkansas, was it Alaska?
One or the
Arkansas.
other. Yeah.
Arkansas, 56%. Conservative Republicans support this by 57%. Liberal Democrats, 83%. Jehovah's Witnesses by 53%. That's a shocker.
Every age category, every race category, every gender category supports this comprehensive non-discrimination approach. And in addition to the 64 Civil Rights Act, this also impacts the Fair Housing Act. It impacts employment, housing, public accommodations. Trying to read my writing again. Jury service, education, federal programs, and credit. This is a sweeping bill, comprehensive, and if all these people support it, then you ask, why can't the Congress pass it? Why can't the president sign it?
90% of the Congress is against hate in all its forms, right?
Some days.
Yes, they did vote on that.
So we thought we would show you the personification of this. We have a couple of things. First, the story of a guy in Mississippi who, in fact, was rejected from...
Carter Brown from a job.
Okay, so let's look at his story, which shows us why we need this law.
I was living the American dream. All of that was stripped from me in seconds. I did come from such a rough background. Family dysfunction. I was homeless by the age of 14. But I did continue high school as well as college, all in pursuit of the American dream. Do well in your career, work hard, build a family. I really learned my way through a mortgage business and real estate and just really connecting with both customers as well as realtors and learning the business, and I excelled really well at it. I was doing great in my career. My wife and I bought our first home. We were able to have my daughter and create a family. One day, I go into work, and a couple of my colleagues asked me if I could go with them into a meeting room so we can have this private conversation. They confronted me and said that it had been rumored that I was a woman, or better yet, that I had a vagina, and they wanted to know if it was true. I was very hurt. I was very embarrassed, and I even felt ashamed. Once being outed as transgender at work, it completely changed my life. Months of discrimination and harassment from colleagues, even managerial staff and human resources. In the eyes of my colleagues, I went from being Carter, the well-liked, competitive go-getter, to, they say that's really a woman, right? So is he gay? He must have had the surgeries because he looks so real. People began to slowly stop talking to me, see me kind of go the other way, huddle in cubicles, quiet when I pass by, see if there's another bathroom that I would like to use. Sometimes I would go on break and sit in my car and cry, because I'm so stressed out about this. I had to mentally prepare in a great way just to go to work every day. I was eventually fired from work simply because of my identity. I felt as if my own identity was a threat to my own livelihood. I had a family to think about at this point. Like any person would who's a provider for their family, what do I do now? I felt all alone. Where am I going to work now? If we had laws like the Equality Act in place, I would have had something to support me. I would have had more confidence in my fight, knowing that there's some sort of protections behind me. I would be as happy as any other American who is pursuing that dream of just taking care of their family and working hard.
Wow. That is a heartrending story.
It is.
And that's what the Equality Act can help fix.
Yes, by being a federal law that does not allow employers to discriminate on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation.
Right.
Now, HRC, which produced that interview with Carter, also produced a little explaining video, which I also think needs a little explaining, but we'll get to that afterwards.
All right.
But this is a pretty good little summation of the problem and the solution.
And it shows you some of the other things that the bill does besides protect LGBTQ rights.
It's hard to believe you can be fired for this, but it's true. Half of Americans live in a state with no legal protections for LGBTQ people. They could be fired from their jobs, evicted from their homes, denied credit, or worse. Imagine you're a gay couple celebrating your anniversary. You walk into a restaurant to have a nice dinner. The manager or the server doesn't approve, says they won't serve you, tells you to get out. That's wrong. Imagine you're a transgender woman and you walk into a store to buy a dress. The clerk decides they don't like transgender people, doesn't want to sell you a dress, tells you they won't sell it to you. That's wrong. Imagine you're a lesbian couple with 3 kids. You've been dreaming of buying a house. You walk into the bank to get a home loan, but the manager of the bank doesn't approve of your relationship, doesn't like your family, refuses to give you credit. Imagine you're a gay couple who just got married, the best day of your life, but then your landlord finds out, decides to evict you. Imagine you're a transgender kid going to school every day. Your teacher won't use the right pronoun. The other kids are harassing you. The school won't let you use a restroom consistent with your gender identity. You should be able to do something about that. You don't have to imagine these things. They happen each and every day. That's why we need the Equality Act. The Equality Act would provide federal protections on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity in all of these key areas of life: employment, housing, credit, education, jury service, public spaces and services, and federally funded programs. The purpose of the Equality Act is to provide the same protections to LGBTQ people that already exist in federal law. But federal law is not perfect. There are ways to improve it as well. One of the things the Equality Act does is it adds protections for women. Right now, women are often charged more when they go into a dry cleaner than men for the same service, the same type of shirt. The Equality Act would fix that. If you're a person of color, under current federal law, you're protected in a lot of ways. But if you walk into a retail store and the mall security trails you and your friends around the mall because you look suspicious, that's not illegal now, but the Equality Act would give you recourse. The good news is the House of Representatives will soon be voting on the Equality Act. But we need your help. We need you to call your member of Congress and tell them to vote yes.
is a pretty good explanation. I would say if you want to emphasize one thing, call your senator.
Yes.
Because your senator, Democrat or Republican, needs some pushing on passing this bill. And call the White House. They're really going to need a push on this.
Do they know how to listen?
Of course not, but you have to be in the game, and you have to make yourself heard, and this is the time. It's now been introduced, so now is the push.
I mean, because when I think of the people that Trump does listen to, he is entertaining the president of Brazil next week on March 19th. President Bolsonaro. They're going to have a little hate fest at the White House. He's a real gay hater. And this is going to be on the 1-year anniversary of the assassination of out lesbian councilwoman Marielle Franco, an activist, by a militia linked to Bolsonaro's family. They finally, I guess it was yesterday, made arrests of two. There's a demonstration last year for Marielle because she was a beloved figure in the opposition in Brazil for the people, and they arrested two either former police officers or whatever in these militias who were part of the group that killed her, and they are trying to actually flip them so that they can maybe get at the whole gang that did this. But one of these guys is from the little town where Bolsonaro lives and has been linked to his family.
And meanwhile, Bolsonaro is tweeting out video of things he considers disgusting at the Pride Parade. But here's who else Trump listens to besides the homophobic, overtly homophobic and evidently violence-supporting president of Brazil. He listens to Tony Perkins of the Family Research Council and Mike Pence, his vice president, and Ryan Anderson of the Heritage Foundation and Representative Vicky Hartzler of Missouri about making trans people leave the military or not be able to serve openly or not be able to transition while they're in the military.
And they get sign off on all the judges that are being appointed. Now the Trump judges are 20% of the federal judiciary. More about that later.
Well, the news this week is that the Trump administration issued a directive now that they think the courts have gotten out of their way to start the ban on trans troops in the military. There are 4 lawsuits that were brought against his ban on trans troops. The 4 courts where these cases were heard all put in injunctions against enforcement of the ban.
Nationally.
3 of those injunctions have been overturned, 2 of them by the Supreme Court, one by a lower court that just said, well, the Supreme Court overturned these, so I have to do that too. One is technically not overturned yet, so the Trump administration is jumping the gun a bit, but the expectation is that it will be overturned before the Trump ban goes into effect in 30 days.
So it's horrible, and we're hearing from advocates for transgender troops that people who are either in the service or who are applying for the service are terrified of this.
Here's the new rule. If you are already in the service and you are trans and you have transitioned and you are out about it, you will be allowed to stay in the service and continue to serve. You are grandfathered in, as they say. If you are in the service and you have transitioned but you're not out about it, you have 30 days to come out because if they find out about you, they will throw you out.
The whole thing is insane and ridiculous.
If you are in the service and you want to transition, you must apply for that and get approved within this 30 days, or you will be out. Now, the exception to that is that the various service secretaries can, on a case-by-case basis, give you a waiver to this rule and let you stay in and let you transition. That's going to be a hard sell, although all the service secretaries support service by trans troops. They're against this ban, so maybe they'll just give a waiver to everybody. And if you apply for the service and are trans or want to transition, they will reject you. And the thing is, they say, this is not a ban on trans troops. You can serve if you're trans as long as you don't transition, as long as you can serve in your birth gender. You can be trans, but you have to serve in your birth gender. It's utterly
hateful and
nonsensical.
It's causing a horrible amount of pain, and it's just, as you said, appealing to the base.
Well, the only bright point in this is that these court cases are not done. These court cases will proceed. The
Supreme Court has not made a final decision on it. They just allowed the ban to go into effect.
Correct. Now, because they allowed the ban to go into effect, you might think that by the time the cases actually get to them, they may be inclined to uphold the ban. But there is always hope that we can convince the court to allow trans people to serve.
Well, maybe if some of the service chiefs or whatever allow people to serve and they can then show there's not a problem.
We've already done that.
Well, I know.
But I do think all is not lost, and the idea is we have to pursue these court cases, as all these legal organizations are doing.
If only Tim Apple had taken advantage of that moment in the White House and said something about this when he was sitting there with the president, and the president was calling him Tim Apple. He did have a sense of humor about it.
I didn't call him Tim Apple.
Yeah, they ran the tape slow. He did.
Yeah.
Tim posted on his, I guess, what is that? Twitter, where he changed his name to Tim and the Apple symbol. But it would have been better if he had said something about the way they're treating trans people.
It's all this equation of corporations that want to do business with the government and want the government to go easy on them, and so they don't speak up.
The most patriotic thing you can do is stand up for justice and the American way. All right. And then, some other Trump notes this week. I read this week that among incarcerated migrant children, they are being delivered now to a Christian adoption service with links to Betsy DeVos. What else did Betsy DeVos do this week? She eased the separation of church and state so that religious schools can get federal money, which they do in a lot of places. But I mean,
this is based on a Supreme Court decision that said a religious-run school in Missouri could take public funds to fix its playground. So they're hanging on that, and that was a very hard-fought case because people don't want religious schools to get public funding.
There was another case that they didn't even take this past week for the Supreme Court on this matter. Everybody thought they were going to go farther, and they didn't.
Well, that's evidently far enough for DeVos, who is now...
She doesn't need any excuses.
She
loves the Lord.
She says religious organizations can get federal funds for secular projects in the public schools.
Okay. Well, as I've always said, we have a horrible situation about that in New York City, where they give tons of money to religious schools.
And we're going to go on to some school stories eventually, but a couple of Pence things. I thought Mayor Pete Buttigieg was excellent in his analysis of Mike Pence.
It is a fantastic line, and we should repeat it.
Okay, you dig it out.
He said... on CNN in his town hall meeting, where he did very well and got a lot of donations as a result, how could Pence allow himself to be the cheerleader for the porn star presidency? Is it that he stopped believing in Scripture when he started believing in Trump? This is a great line. I mean, he's a very smart, thoughtful guy on a lot of issues.
I'd love to see him debate Trump.
But he's also a phrase maker.
Yeah.
And people are going to remember that phrase, and it's going to be hung on Trump, the porn star presidency. What are you going to call? You can't even pronounce Pete Buttigieg.
And meanwhile,
and he also wants a 15-member Supreme Court.
Yes.
Now, I've talked about this in the past.
Yes.
But of course, his thing would require an amendment to the Constitution. He said, yes, expand the federal judiciary and add more justices, but let the additional 6 be a consensus pick, each one, of the existing Supreme Court. Because he says the court has become too politicized, every one of these appointments causes a horrible thing in the country. Let's take some of that pressure off and get judges that everybody can agree are fair judges.
Well, that'll take centuries.
Well, that would take, because the president in the Constitution gets to appoint these people, but the number 9 is not in the Constitution. And by the way, Kate Kendall, late of National Center for Lesbian Rights, is now managing Pack the Courts, which is headed by Aaron Belkin, who used to do service members.
He's still doing military stuff. And Nancy Pelosi.
And a former Attorney General, Eric Holder, has endorsed this idea.
Yes.
And you can go to PAC SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, pacscotus.org, They want 4 seats added to the Supreme Court, and they want to expand the lower courts. Otherwise, people like Ann and me are going to be living under this regime for the rest of our lives.
I thought you were going to say we'd be living under this table for the rest of our lives. And thank you to Nancy Pelosi, who took away Mike Pence's office in the Capitol that Paul Ryan had given to him. So no more Pence living in the Capitol.
And as long as we're talking about large-scale reforms, the Colorado House passed the National Popular Vote Bill, the 13th state to do so.
Yes.
We are now up to states representing 181 votes, you need 270, who say, we will cast our electors for whoever wins the national popular vote. It's a way of doing this without changing the Constitution.
It's so that you don't have a Donald Trump who got 3 million fewer popular votes, assuming the presidency, because where his votes were gave him more electoral votes. This is saying we won't go through the process of getting rid of the Electoral College, even though it's bad. But what we will do is set up a system that becomes a one-person, one-vote election for president by assigning the electoral votes as the popular vote goes.
You can look it up, National Popular Vote, and it's very important that we get that done and get that done fast. And then, all of you who live in states that are ignored by the presidential candidates because your state is going to go for one or the other would now be in play.
Yes.
Everybody would be in play.
Yes.
Every vote would be in play.
Yes. So that would be great.
All right.
Here's another bad Trump thing. This was a poignant story in the New York Times Magazine this last weekend.
Yes.
Customs officials took an HIV-positive mother and her 2 daughters, one of whom is 18 and HIV positive. They had fled Honduras, where they were being horrendously abused, and Customs said, all right, the HIV-positive mother and the non-infected daughter can stay here and apply for asylum, but the 18-year-old HIV-positive has to go back to Honduras. Absolutely insane and cruel beyond imagining.
All the stuff at the border is insane. Elizabeth Warren was down there this week looking around. They wouldn't let cameras in. Well, she had to talk about it. Speaking of transgender troops, Chelsea Manning was locked up this week for refusing to testify in the WikiLeaks case. Now, this was a case that the Obama administration had pursued and abandoned, but now the Trump administration is pursuing. And the judge is going to say you're locked up for the duration of the grand jury or 18 months at the maximum. But Chelsea said, these secret proceedings tend to favor the government. I'm always willing to explain things publicly. And Glenn Greenwald, the journalist from Brazil, raises the issue, this is a press freedom case, and they want to crack down.
And Chelsea also says this is stuff I testified about years ago. There's nothing new. But others say, look, you're allowed to come out of the grand jury and talk about everything that you testified to, so maybe this is something you didn't need to do to refuse to testify.
And although you all read that Paul Manafort got light sentences for his crimes, the New York State Attorney General Tish James is investigating the banks and the Trump organization, especially Deutsche Bank, in a civil investigation for fraud. That's a civil case. And the Manhattan DA, Cy Vance, is trying to redeem himself for not indicting Ivanka and Jared when he had the chance years ago. And he is bringing 16 charges against Paul Manafort.
Well, let's hopscotch the states a little. In Utah, they had a no conversion therapy bill, but at the last minute it was gutted and died. And activists there are very upset and were demonstrating at the State House. The executive director of Equality Utah resigned from the state suicide task force.
That's Troy Williams.
Troy Williams, we have a picture of him.
And he said, I'm not going to be window dressing for your task force if you're not going to do anything and you're not going to meet with us and you're not going to deal with these issues. He says, if you change your mind, you know where to find me.
And he said conversion therapy is causing some of these suicides.
Right.
So the governor writes a letter apologizing.
Well, Monday there was a demonstration by University of Utah students who went to his office.
Yes.
And they're funny. They're not, you go to Andrew Cuomo's office, he just shuts the gate. But this guy said, I'm really sorry, and they passed the hate crimes bill.
The lieutenant governor came out
Yes.
and sat with the students and talked to them and gave them the letter from the governor saying, I totally misunderstood this. Let's start again. I was I was deceived, or I just didn't get it. I hear you. Let's start talking about this again.
And as I said, they passed the hate crimes bill this week.
Let's see. In Nevada, they're having a little problem there. We have told you with great joy about the out gay African American president of the
State
Senate, the state Senate Majority Leader,
Kelvin Atkinson.
It seemed like a great success story. Well, it turns out that Kelvin has been using campaign funds for personal use, and he pled guilty to some charges, and he is out as the Majority Leader
And the
of
new
the
leader
state
is
Senate.
Senator Nicole Cannizzaro, the first woman in the post.
Well, as we have said, Nevada has a female majority legislature, so it's not a surprise they would end up with a woman in charge.
Okay, this story surprised me. The Falwells are terrible. They run Liberty University, and they were down there.
Big basketball power.
They were down there at the CPAC conference, and at one point.
This is Jerry Jr. and his wife.
Jerry Jr. says, we just welcomed a baby girl into the family, grandparents, and we're raising her as a girl. We're not letting her have a choice. And Jerry said she's got a little baby doll under her arm every second, to which Donald Trump Jr., who's on the panel with him, says, my boys always, excuse me. Jerry Falwell said, my boys always have guns in their hands, and Trump Jr. said, #MeToo. So, Liberty University, we just showed you, students, 30 of them protested, led by an out bisexual sophomore, Elizabeth Axley. 30 students at Liberty University. Are you allowed to be bisexual at Liberty University?
Well, I don't think they can shoot you for that, even if their sons are carrying guns.
All right.
All right. Other educational news. In Kansas, a Catholic school in Kansas rejected the application of a kindergarten student. Why? Because the student has parents who are a same-sex couple. And the school explained that the problem is that those parents can't model the behavior
Of the Holy Family.
Yes, that is acceptable. What, of the virgin birth?
No, that's always their excuse.
Yeah. Can't model the behavior that is acceptable to Catholic teaching. And to have a child in the school, a kindergarten child who has same-sex parents, would confuse the other children.
So this was mainly coming from the Archdiocese, right?
Yeah.
So parishioners really got up in arms about this, and they asked the Archbishop to reconsider. They said, the school doesn't reject kids of non-Catholics. It doesn't reject people who have been divorced and remarried. What is exactly the
adultery?
standard here? You just hate gays. So we'll see.
People are getting smart.
Well,
we've been hammering them on the head for so many years.
Well,
they figured it out.
What's his name from Saturday Night Live got in trouble this week. What's his name?
Pete
Davidson. Yes, Pete Davidson, because he said supporting the Catholic Church is the same thing as being a fan of R. Kelly these days. So
was he in favor of that or against it?
So he said, so the Brooklyn diocese got all up in arms. It is likely that no other institution has done more than the Catholic Church to combat and prevent sexual abuse. Now, Davidson had a great kicker line. He said he saw no difference between R. Kelly and the church, except one's music is significantly better.
I think that's the Catholic Church.
I don't know who he is speaking of. He just said one of them.
I think he probably meant
Oh,
R.
look,
Kelly.
come on. In Baltimore, you had 2 bishops who were stopped from functioning as priests this week because of their past abuse.
You had an abusive priest who was murdered
Yes.
in
Well,
New
we're not
Jersey.
for that. We're not for that.
That's the Jersey way.
We're not for that.
I take that back. That was a cheap joke,
Right.
a Sopranos joke.
Well, yes, you recently went through the whole
That's
Sopranos
right. I've been
thing.
brainwashed.
Yes.
Well, here's a little better news. In Kentucky, the gay male couple who were plaintiffs in the marriage suit there have created a scholarship for LGBT Catholic students at the University of Louisville. College students, they should help out this elementary school student in Kansas.
The Methodist colleges are seriously considering ending their affiliation with the Methodist Church at this point because of their homophobia that they voted for.
Yeah.
They're not, and it's been a tenuous relationship anyway for a lot of these schools, and they're just saying it's untenable now.
All right. Let's move to Mississippi, where a trans woman was denied a job in daycare.
Katrina Kelly, 26 years old.
She was invited to come to the daycare place to work there for a day.
Everything's fine.
Nothing wrong.
Let's sign you up, Katrina. Let's see your birth certificate.
Yeah.
Oh, you were born a man. No, you're gone.
Because Mississippi is the state with the worst law, the one that says if you have any objection at all to someone who is trans or someone's sexual orientation or whatever, you can refuse to hire them or whatever. There are no barriers at all.
Right.
And this has devolved to the detriment of Katrina.
Now, we told you about the homophobia of a New York City council member, a Democrat named Ruben Diaz Sr., who's a Pentecostal minister. He lost his subcommittee because he started saying that the city council was controlled by homosexuals. Well, he's lost his subcommittee, but he's unrepentant. This week he retweeted an article saying Hollywood is controlled by homosexual Jewish men who expect favors. He just doesn't get. He can't stop himself.
There is a little of that in Hollywood.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. But not totally controlled.
No, absolutely not.
You were.
And I'm talking about the gay men expecting favors, not the Jews.
That's true.
In Chicago, Jussie Smollett has been hit with 16 felony counts.
His lawyer says it's overkill.
At the very least.
Well, and the police are in trouble to some extent for spilling the beans on things as the investigation was going on.
And the hospital.
60 employees have been let go for accessing his medical records. If you went on your computer and looked up his records, you're fired.
Some of them are saying, well, I was in this position and I had a right to look up his records, but 60 of them are out the door. Look, this is insane. He didn't hurt anyone.
Well, the hurt for a lot of people was, first of all, destroying a lot of people's ideas of what a hate crime is by, faking. Well, that hurt a lot of people.
We still don't know the facts.
And
he's still denying
it. He's still saying not guilty. And what it does in terms of resources devoted to something like that.
Yes, certainly. But they act like they're devoting all their resources to good things, which I would argue with. I just think this is piling on, and we don't know the facts of the case yet. Maybe he is just guilty from the word go, but I still don't think that requires...
And maybe he has some emotional issues, I assume he does.
That's more what I expect, and that he needs some help rather than being indicted on 16 counts.
Well, they're going to give you some help in Indiana because they've begun issuing gender-neutral non-binary markers, an X on your driver's license if you'd like that, and it was done not because of legislation, on the recommendation of the American Academy of Motor Vehicle Administrators.
And the absence of Mike Pence.
But you do need to submit a physician's note or an amended birth certificate. Can't just come in and say, I want it. Other states with this option are Arkansas, California, Colorado, Maine, Minnesota, Oregon, and the District of Columbia.
Nice. All right, in Iowa, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of 2 trans women who were rejected for Medicaid coverage of their trans care, surgery or hormones or whatever, and the court said, no, Medicaid has to cover this.
Yep.
So that's a big win, and there's another case like that.
Yes, there is another. There was another court.
Ohio.
Yeah.
The appeals court ordered a lower court to, this is to reconsider a trans teen's name change request, and the appeals court said, this is disgusting.
Arbitrary, unconscionable, unreasonable, and based solely on the trans status of the applicant's child. The kid was 15, is 15. The court really, this is the first time we've gotten a pro-LGBT decision out of the Ohio Court of Appeals.
Very enlightened. But they had to send it back to the lower court, which could make the same decision or
Same guy?
not. I think so, yes.
Oh, God.
In North Carolina, Lambda Legal Defense and the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Foundation are suing over the denial of health care coverage to state employees who are trans.
The North Carolina State Health Plan categorically excludes coverage for gender confirming health care. Mm-hmm. In Tremont,
here's the other Medicaid story, Alaska.
Yeah.
Trans woman Swan Bean of Homer, Alaska, is suing the Department of Health of Alaska for Medicaid coverage of trans care.
In California, a non-binary person was turned away for giving blood. Van Levy, 31, had donated for 13 years in San Diego. The blood bank says they need guidance from the FDA about how to deal with these people because all of our guidelines are based on you being a man or a woman. So they're going to, and of course the advocacy groups say blood plasma doesn't have a gender.
Exactly, and these rules are very arbitrary and nonsensical to begin with. Blood donation rules should deal with whether you've engaged in any risk behaviors, no matter what your gender or sexual orientation are. Have you had unprotected sex?
Well, apparently they have different standards for men and women.
Of course
in
they
these
do.
Things.
Yes, and that's unfortunate. And by the way, Van Levy not only ran into this problem at the blood bank as a person with a non-binary identification, but has also had problems with their passport and their driver's license, too. Okay. So even though these states are more enlightened about instituting these non-binary identifications, not everyone has gotten the message yet.
In Tremont, Mississippi, parents run the prom because the school doesn't want to do it because they get sued and everything about who can come.
Well, they were sued.
Yes. So parents sent out a message that guests have to be of the opposite sex. But then they said it was a mistake. They just wanted to limit the crowd. They didn't want anybody to just bring anybody.
It's very traditional for proms to have rules about groups of same-gender people coming together.
They will let same-gender people come. It's going to take place at the Tammy Wynette facility on April 26th.
That alone would be a reason to go.
How about Chicago? You know, we told you there's going to be a runoff for mayor between 2 African-American women, and one of them is an out lesbian, Lori Lightfoot. And she is worried.
Well, they asked at a debate.
Wondering.
They asked at a debate, the moderator said, what can you say nice about your opponent? So Lori Lightfoot turns to Tony Preckwinkle, thank you, and says, well, I really admire her longstanding commitment to making health care available to those who really need it and are underprivileged. And Preckwinkle turns to Lightfoot and says, I really admire the fact that you're so open about your sexual orientation.
So Lori is sort of wondering if she was just trying to get that in there to make it an issue with conservative voters, but whatever.
We'll see. The vote is April 4th for the new mayor of Chicago.
We told you about the Equality Act. Well, SAGE, for older people, had a National Day of Advocacy today when we're taping on Wednesday, and they're also lobbying, in addition, for the LGBT Elders Act.
Back to North Carolina, the ACLU is demanding that a trans woman be moved from the men's to the women's prison.
Yeah.
She is post-op and is really undergoing a lot of harassment in the men's prison.
In South Carolina, an elementary school in Moore, South Carolina, rejected a fourth grader's essay on LGBT acceptance for a book of essays on society because it might upset parents. So the mother is suing. This is a 10-year-old. Her granddad is apparently an LGBT rights activist. The student wrote, "Ray trans people, that some people think they are choosing the wrong thing in life. But in the world, people can choose who they want."
What a subversive 10-year-old. In Massachusetts, the Republican governor, Charlie Baker, says that he is inclined to support a law forbidding conversion therapy for minors. He hasn't totally agreed to it yet.
Yep.
But he's pretty sure he would sign it.
In Alabama, Roy Moore is thinking of running again against Doug Jones. Wouldn't that be nice? I mean,
they just never go away, do they?
Roy, I will contribute to the campaign.
And we mourn the loss and celebrate the life of John Richardson, who died at 95. He was an extremely famous art historian. That's him on the right with his pal, Pablo Picasso.
Who we wrote about many times.
Well, he's written a 4-volume biography of him.
He's still working on it when he died
Yes.
at 95.
Yes.
He knew everybody gay in the world, Tennessee Williams and all those
Oh, he was
people.
95. He was around for a long time. And he had a partner, Douglas Cooper, for a long time. They were, very out and about, and, we think we invented this, but please.
We're not going to mention that the Texas Republican Party took one little anti-gay thing off their platform at the behest of the gays.
Tell me, I'm not aware.
They removed some anti-LGBT language from its infamous platform. It no longer says homosexuality is a chosen behavior that must not be presented as an acceptable lifestyle. They're still against all LGBT rights. But this is seen as progress.
But they love us.
And they do a bathroom bill against transgender people is a top priority for 2019, along with not removing Confederate monuments.
Hey, let's move to international
Please.
news. Maybe the rest of the world is more enlightened than we are.
Well, Australia is locking up Cardinal George Pell, 77, a virulent anti-gay bigot, once the number 2 in the Vatican, 6 years for sexually abusing boys. The judge called
Pell Manafort.
The judge called his attacks breathtakingly arrogant.
Yeah, but he was technically subject to a 50-year prison term, and he got 6. And there are a lot of people who think 6 was pretty light.
He's got 2 former prime ministers speaking up for him at trial.
And he's 77 years old. In China, the Chinese government says, oh yes, we accept the United Nations Human Rights Council's recommendations on LGBT rights, such as adopting a sexual orientation, gender identity, non-discrimination law within the next year. Oh, we've already done that, they say. And so there are a list of things. But activists say, no, there's no non-discrimination law. Our content is censored online.
They just shut down 2 LGBTI organizations, and it's very difficult to register new ones. This is something that we were going through here in 1973 when states would not register gay groups, officially.
So it's fake news that China has agreed to this.
They could have said no. Just say yes and do what you want to do. Is that it?
I guess so. In Guatemala, the Congress will vote to ban same-sex marriage, although legalizing same-sex marriage has been mandated by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Activists in Guatemala will sue if the country does pass the no same-sex marriage bill. And 2 gay men are running for Congress there, which is a good thing. The vote is June 16th.
And in Thailand, they're having their big election on March 24th, and the first trans woman to run for prime minister is...
President.
Was it president?
That's what I wrote down.
Okay. Pauline Ing Arm Pring, 49 years old, from the Chone Party. She's not a front runner, but the party has 20 LGBT candidates running for parliament. She transitioned into the United States for 3 years, and her openness and the openness of all these other candidates is getting LGBT issues discussed in those states.
So we will watch
in that country.
We will watch the March 24th election in Thailand, the April 4th election in Chicago, and the June 16th election in Guatemala.
And the Polish elections are coming up for the European Parliament, so they're piling on with anti-gay stuff with the ruling party. They're having their national elections later this year. But this week in Poland, an Olympic windsurf medalist, Sofia Klepaka, attacked the Warsaw mayor. We told you about his pro-LGBT order, and she said no to the promotion of LGBTI people and said her grandfather didn't fight in Warsaw Uprising for this. So a veteran of the Warsaw Uprising, an ancient person named Wanda, said, we fought for human dignity.
Person?
Well, I mean, this is the Warsaw Uprising was in World War II, okay? Wanda, I could go over the rest of the name, and she said we fought for human dignity and nobody is allowed to be disregarded. So after this controversy, soccer fans in Warsaw unfurled a banner supporting her, Klepaka, the anti-gay one, and then they put up another banner saying, keep Warsaw free from faggots. This is allowed in Warsaw stadiums.
Oh, free speech?
I guess it's terrible.
Yes.
Like waving the Confederate flag.
Well, did you see that story of the girl in, oh no, I haven't written it down. A young girl in like middle school, maybe high school, and she came to school one day and there are all these pride flags up. And so she starts writing Bible verses on little Post-it notes and posting them all over school. And she gets reprimanded for this and told that she's being disrespectful and abusive to the GSA.
Well, how do you think I feel about the pride flag? She said.
She says, I didn't even know what this GSA was. I wasn't abusing anyone. I was trying to help people. They need help. They need God. God needs to cure them. They should not be forced to stay in this LGBT lifestyle.
Just trying to help.
And so, does she have free speech rights to post that?
This is the issue of the century.
Well, she's not an organization. She's an individual putting up notes. And they said, well, you didn't have permission.
I mean, some people got Bible verses tattooed on themselves, so what are they going to do?
Exactly. In the Netherlands, the Senate has added sexual orientation and gender identity non-discrimination to a non-discrimination law.
In the United Kingdom, the Women's Prize for Nonfiction, which was instituted because so few women were nominated for the Booker Prize 27 years ago, is for the first time, a non-binary trans person author, a Nigerian author named Akweki Mez, 31, who lives in Brooklyn now, for her first novel, Freshwater.
Non-binary, probably.
She's on the short list.
Their first novel.
Yes. Oh, did I not say that?
You said her.
That's wrong. I have their written down here. Sorry. Short list comes out April 29th, and the winner will be announced June 5th.
In Malaysia, the minister there condemned the presence of LGBT people in the International Women's Day March, calling it anti-Islamic. All right, AIDS news.
Okay. Well, so the president put his budget in this week, which we don't really need to discuss because, you know, it's just a political document.
Well, it has more money for PrEP. But it doesn't do anything about the prices for PrEP, which he could bring down by taking back the patent.
And it would, you know, it puts 291 million more, but it also cuts $2 trillion. $2 trillion from Medicaid and Medicare over the next 10 years. Wow.
And cuts
We'll all be
PEPFAR, the president's emergency AIDS fund, by $1.35 billion. Cuts the global fund, cuts housing for AIDS.
In this country, only about a tenth of those who need to be on PrEP are on it. Now, but the CDC did say this week that PrEP use is way up from 2014 to 17. increased sixfold, significantly lower among gay and bisexual men of color, but
it's still expensive, and not all insurance covers it. Corey Johnson, our Speaker of the City Council, says that the National Institutes of Health should break Gilead's exclusive patent. By the way, the president is also taking $5 billion out of the NIH budget. But mostly in AIDS news this week, we want to celebrate and mourn the loss of Jim Chudd.
Yes.
62 years old, living with AIDS, with HIV since 1977.
wow.
42
Before we
years.
even knew about it.
He was 20 when he believes he acquired HIV, and he lived with it until age 62, at which point he died of sepsis connected to bacterial pneummonia, not pneumocystis pneumonia, which a lot of people with HIV died of years ago.
Right.
He was an HIV care analyst for the LA County of Human Services, on the National AIDS Housing Coalition Board, West Hollywood Disabilities Advisory Board, a journalist, a software expert. And when he found out he had HIV and he saw people around him wasting and dying, he went out and put on a ton of muscle. He made himself huge so that he could fight against the wasting that would come from having HIV and the drugs. He was also in a very early drug trial of DDC. 80
Remember
people
that?
in the trial. He was the only one who survived.
Wow.
Because it was a high-dose DDC, and it killed everyone else. And he saw what was happening and demanded to be taken off the trial, and he did. And when he called the researcher a few decades later, the guy said, "What? I can't believe you're still alive. Everybody else died." Great activist, Jim Chudd.
Well, a lot of great activists, we are on to
Yeah,
entertainment.
yeah.
A lot of great activists were in the room for the Broadway Backwards benefit for Broadway Cares and the LGBT Center. They raised a record $700,000. So charming to see people like Len Cariou get up there and sing a women's song like Here's to the Ladies Who Lunch. It was hilarious. Kathleen Turner sang a men's song. Darren Criss did a gay song. He said he wouldn't do any more gay roles, but he did that, and he was great from Company. The whole thing was just a wonderful show.
And another wonderful show coming up at the GLAAD Media Awards in Los Angeles, March 28th, because Jay-Z and Beyonce are going to show up to accept the Vanguard Award as allies. They've both spoken out for LGBT rights, used a lot of LGBT people in their videos. They really have done a lot, and that should be terrific. And on May 4th, Madonna will be at the New York City GLAAD Awards getting an award.
Now, if you're planning to go to Washington to agitate for the president to be impeached, you might want to go to the museum there, because until the end of the year, they're going to have a big exhibition, Rise Up, Stonewall and the LGBTQ rights movement. These photos that are given to us from Mark Siegel, they go through the Stonewall era. We're just going to flip through these photos really quickly. The Gay Liberation Front, there's Marsha P. Johnson in the streets. There's Gilbert Baker's sewing machine and flag. And what else do we have? We have one other picture? No, but it looks like a great exhibit. Thank you, Mark Siegel.
And Marvel Comics is seeking a gay actor to star as a gay superhero in a 2020 movie of the Eternals. They prefer someone out gay, 30 to 49, any ethnicity. Contact Marvel, not us. And we will be back next week. Bye.